China is a communist country, isn't it? Welcome to the Zeitgeist, guys. In order to understand if China is actually communist, it's important to first define what communism is. Technically, true communism is a leaderless and classless society where decisions are made by the community. These ideas can originally be traced back to the ancient Greeks and Persians, but they became much more common during the Industrial Revolution in the US, when various utopian experiments such as New Harmony and Brook Farm emerged. About 20 years later, this ideology gained much more traction as Karl Marx described it as this. Communism is a socioeconomic system structured upon the common ownership of the means of production and characterized by the absence of social classes, money, and the state, as well as a social, political, and economic ideology and movement that aims to establish this social order. These utopian experiments never worked, and despite what you may have heard, Marx's vision of communism has never actually existed on a large scale anywhere, as pure communism is also inherently democratic. Communist countries have had powerful central governments making decisions instead of the community. Even by this altered definition, could China still be considered communist? Well, the answer to that question has changed quite a bit over the past 40 years. For the first 30 years of its existence, Chairman Mao led a government where everything was state-owned and profits were seized. However, it failed miserably and led to the deadliest famine in human history. In 1979, China began vigorously studying Singapore's economic success and started allowing for private enterprise and the arrival of foreign businesses. Shekou Industrial Zone on the small fishing village of Shenzhen became the very first special economic zone in an attempt to attract foreign capital, and today that fishing village of 10,000 people now has over 16 million. Even though about 60% of Chinese corporations are state-owned, there has also been an explosion in privately owned companies. There are now over 135,000 foreign businesses registered in China. The Shenzhen Stock Exchange is now the 8th largest stock exchange in the world, with the Shanghai Stock Exchange coming in 5th. Hundreds of Chinese companies trade on the American stock exchanges, as Alibaba had one of the highest initial public offerings in history. China has comparable income tax rates to the US. They've also got many less restrictions on open-air markets, and anyone who has been there has enjoyed a bit of haggling. China does not have universal or single-payer healthcare, and instead they have a for-profit healthcare model, which happens to be one of the worst-ranked healthcare systems on Earth. The social safety net in China has been becoming progressively weaker over the past several decades, and an argument can be made that even the US has a stronger social welfare system. While it's not quite to the level of the US, income inequality has risen sharply in China, as the top 1% now holds about as much wealth as the bottom 50%. China's tax revenues are today used to invest in advanced technologies, military modernization, and infrastructure projects abroad, such as the One Belt, One Road initiative. It can be said that Chinese people experience quite a bit of economic freedom, with the trade-off being political repression. Many would argue that this has been a reasonable trade-off, as China has experienced decades of major growth without the rise of shanty towns, and 850 million people have been pulled out of poverty. In order to achieve this, the government has had complete control over the media. All land belongs to them, and they control the internet, as over 8,000 foreign websites are blocked. Are some of these things really so different from the US, though? While we do have stronger property rights in the US, the government can take our land, begging the question, do we ever really own it? Because of eminent domain, the government can seize property, and the property owner must sue the United States for compensation. Eminent domain was originally meant for the government to acquire land needed for public use. However, a 2005 court case ruled that the government can seize land from property owners and transfer it to private developers. While the Chinese government has complete control over their media, 6 corporations own 90% of the media in the US. Following the 1987 repeal of an FCC regulation requiring fair political coverage, media bias in the US has become much more pervasive.
Speaking of facts and how no one seems to have a clear sense of what is going on these days, according to a Gallup poll, Americans, they asked a question about misinformation and bias, and apparently they said estimates on percentage of bias, inaccuracy, misinformation in news coverage. So according to people, 62% of the coverage that they see is biased. I'm actually surprised it's not higher than 62%. Where do you...
Free speech in the US has been curtailed many times throughout history. During both the Civil War and World War I, those who spoke out against the war efforts could be arrested and charged with espionage. In the 1950s, during the McCarthy era, many communists were banned from speaking at universities and potentially faced trial for un-American activities. In the 1970s, Daniel Ellsberg was charged with the Espionage Act for releasing documents showing that the Johnson and Nixon administrations lied to us about the Vietnam War. Currently, whistleblowers Julian Assange and Edward Snowden are languishing in the UK and Russia, respectively. While we do not outright block popular websites like China does, social media companies have recently been under fire for censorship, shadow banning, and deplatforming. Controversial speakers like Alex Jones, Gavin McInnes, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Dennis Prager have all been deplatformed on one or more social media sites. Many more people have been shadow banned and have had YouTube videos demonetized. While we have nowhere near the censorship and restrictions on free speech that China does, we definitely do not have complete freedom of speech in the US. We never have.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice.
Is China really communist, or is it an autocratic mixed economy? Is the US really a capitalist democracy, or is it a mixed economy controlled by a corporate oligarchy? While corporations have a lot of freedom to grow in China, the government still has a monopoly on power. In 2020, over $14 billion has been spent on elections in the US, smashing previous records. Unlike China, where the government has control over its corporations, it appears that in the US, the corporations have control over the government. Coming back to my earlier point, it's clear that communism and democracy have never coexisted. But couldn't we say the same about capitalism and democracy? That's the Zeitgeist, guys. I hope that you all enjoyed that, and there's quite a lot to unpack and discuss here. If you like what you see on my channel, do me a favor, give me a like, subscribe, comment. Anything would be amazing. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one.